The wind came first dry, sharp, and full of dust. It scraped across the wooden porches of Dry Bluff, a forgotten border town where even the dogs had stopped barking. The sun sat low, heavy like a hammer on the tin roofs, and the only sound was the slow creak of a wagon pulling into the square. Elias Crowe reined in his horse and squinted through the glare. He hadn't planned on stopping long, just a sack of flour, some salt, and medicine for Clara, his daughter. 7 years old, still pale from last winter's sickness, still sleeping with her mother's shawl pressed to her chest. He tugged at his hat brim and stepped down. That's when he heard it. $6. All 7. Take 'em or leave 'em. The voice came from the livery yard, a man in a torn vest standing on a crate, waving his arms like he was calling hogs. A small crowd had gathered, mostly men who didn't have much better to do. Elias hesitated, dust rising around his boots. He told himself to keep walking, but something in the tone, a mix of mockery and disgust, pulled him closer. The sight stopped him cold. 7 women stood side by side in the heat, backs to the stable wall. Apache, all of them, thin, sunburned, their clothes worn but clean. No chains, only a frayed rope tied to a post like someone had thought twice about keeping them leashed. Their faces were calm in that strange, proud way of people who had already lost everything once. The seller grinned, spit into the dust. Caught near the border. Sheriff says they're not wanted, but the town wants them gone. $6, and I'll even throw in their blankets. The men laughed. No one stepped forward. Elias shifted, jaw tightening. He wasn't a saint. He'd done his share of hard things, enough to know when a deal stank of cruelty. He thought of Clara again, alone in that cabin, the quiet too big for one child. He reached into his coat pocket and felt the folded bills. $6, enough for salt, sugar, and something more than silence. I'll take them, he said. The crowd went still. The man on the crate blinked. All 7? Elias nodded once. I'm not here to own anyone, just giving them a place to go. The man shrugged, grabbed the money, and turned away before the dust even settled. The women didn't move until Elias did. My ranch is north of here, he said quietly. If you want to come, get in the wagon. If not, stay. One by one, they climbed up, no words spoken. The wagon rolled out of Dry Bluff, wheels squealing against the dry earth. Elias didn't look back. He didn't need to. Behind him, the town faded into the heat shimmer, and ahead, across miles of open land, the wind carried the sound of 7 women breathing, alive and silent, on their way to a place none of them had yet dared to call home. The wagon creaked under the weight of silence. The trail north wound through dry grass and pale rock, the kind of road that punished men who had nowhere else to go. Elias Crowe kept his eyes on the horizon, rein steady in his hands. The 7 women sat in the back, their shawls pulled tight against the wind, faces half hidden from the Sunday. No one spoke. Even the horses seemed to understand that sound didn't belong in this kind of silence. Every few miles, Elias glanced over his shoulder. The eldest, the one who carried herself like a leader, met his eyes once, just once, then looked away. He caught the faint scent of smoke and leather, the kind of smell that made him think of campfires long gone cold. By dusk, the land softened. The canyon walls opened into the flat stretch of his property. Crow Ranch, miles of dust, a barn missing boards, and a cabin with one candle still burning in the window. His daughter Clara waited there. She stepped out when the wagon stopped, barefoot, her hair tangled from wind. When she saw the women, she froze. Elias dismounted slowly, his voice low and steady. They're staying the night, he said. Maybe longer. Clara nodded, gripping her mother's old shawl tighter around her shoulders. The women climbed down, uncertain, watching the small girl like she was something fragile. Inside, Elias lit the lamp. The cabin smelled of coffee grounds and wood smoke. 1 table, 2 cots, 1 small fire too little for 9 souls. You can rest here, he said. Eat when I eat. Work if you wish, but no one owes me a thing. No answer. But the youngest, a small woman with a braid over her shoulder, moved toward the fire, her hands trembling as she reached to warm them. Elias stepped outside again, the night wind brushing against his face. Behind him came the soft sound of breathing, the crackle of firewood, and something else, a faint hum, low and careful, like a prayer whispered in another language. For the first time in a long while, the ranch didn't sound empty. Morning broke cold and clear. Thin light spilled across the hard dirt yard, sliding through the gaps of the barn like it didn't know whether to stay. Elias Crowe was already outside, splitting wood, his breath turning white in the air. Behind him, from inside the cabin, came the low crackle of fire and the faint rhythm of movement, the sound of 7 strangers learning how to exist under one roof. When he went in, the smell of smoke and cornmeal filled the room. The eldest woman, Lydia, was kneeling by the stove, feeding the fire like she'd always done it. The others moved quietly. Asha cleaned a tin pot. Kiona folded a torn quilt. Taya checked the door latch. Sani hummed a soft tune under her breath. Nomi swept the floor with a broken broom, and Nahila sat by the wall, mending something with small, precise stitches. Elias paused at the doorway, hat in hand. He'd lived in this house for years without sound, just the wind, the crack of wood, and sometimes his own voice talking to the horses. Now it was different. Not loud, not lively, but alive. Clara peeked out from her corner, her doll clutched tight. Lydia looked up, met the girl's eyes, and gave a small nod. No smile, just a quiet acknowledgement you're safe here. Clara crept closer to the fire. Sani's song changed, turning into a lullaby without words. Elias cleared his throat. "There's work if any of you want it," he said, trying not to sound like an order. "The fences are falling, the roof leaks, and I could use help with the stock." Lydia stood, her expression unreadable. "We work because we choose to," she said simply. He nodded. "That's all I ask." The rest of the day moved slow but steady. Elias fixed the pump near the well, while Taya helped carry water. Asha showed Clara how to grind corn, her hands gentle but sure. When the sun dipped behind the ridge, the house smelled of stew, something warm, something human. That night, Elias sat on the porch, hands rough and tired, listening. Inside, 7 women and a little girl breathed in rhythm with the fire. No laughter yet, no trust, but no fear either. For a man who'd buried both love and hope, that was enough for one night. By the 4th dawn, the ranch no longer sounded like a graveyard. The wind still came down from the ridge, carrying sand and chill, but it met the hum of women's voices, the scrape of buckets, and the rhythm of footsteps that no longer tiptoed. Elias Crowe stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, and watched as Taya led his mare to the trough. The animal, once skittish, now drank without fear. Kiona and Nomi were spreading blankets on the fence rails to dry, their hair glinting in the pale light. From the cabin came Sani's soft song, the kind meant for children. Inside, Clara laughed, a sound Elias hadn't heard in over a year. He stopped in the yard, the sound hitting him square in the chest. That laugh. It broke something open. Asha stepped out of the door then, sleeves rolled up, cheeks flushed from the stove heat. "Breakfast soon," she said. Her voice carried an ease that hadn't been there before. Elias nodded, his throat too tight to answer. When they sat to eat, the table felt smaller. Not for its size, but for the way silence had shrunk. Bowls passed, spoons clinked. Someone murmured a prayer in Apache. Elias didn't understand the words, but he bowed his head anyway. After breakfast, he saddled the wagon. "Need to ride to the ridge. Fences are down again," he said. "Anyone wants to see the land, you can come." To his surprise, Lydia rose. "We'll come," she said, glancing at Taya and Asha. The 3 followed him out, their shawls snapping in the wind. They rode in near silence for miles. When they reached the edge of his property, the land spread wide, and gold beneath the sunday. Lydia studied it with narrowed eyes. "How long you live here?" she asked. 7 years, Elias said. "Built the cabin when Clara was born." Lydia nodded slowly. "Your wife, she's gone?" Elias hesitated, the wind tugging at his collar. "She died slow," he said. "I buried her behind the barn." No pity came from Lydia's face, only understanding. "We all buried someone." The ride back was quiet, but not the same kind of quiet as before. It was heavier, shared, human. That evening, the women lit candles in the windows. Sani sang by the fire while Clara tried to follow the words. Elias sat on the porch, boots off, watching the light spill through the cracks. For the first time, he didn't see ghosts in those walls. He saw life uncertain, fragile, but alive. The ranch, once hollow, was breathing again. The storm rolled in without warning. By dusk, the sky had turned the color of gunmetal, and wind came howling through the canyon like a beast set loose. Elias Crowe was in the barn when the first drops fell, cold, fat, angry. He slammed the gate shut, but the rain came faster than his hands could move. Inside the cabin, 7 women hurried to close the shutters. Asha threw another log into the fire. Lydia checked the roof seams, and Nomi wrapped Clara in a quilt that smelled of pine smoke. Thunder cracked overhead. The walls shook. The lantern flickered like a heartbeat afraid to stop. Elias burst through the door, soaked to the bone. "Roof's holding," he said, catching his breath. "But the barn's flooding. I need another pair of hands." Before he could turn, Taya was already at the door, rope over her shoulder. "I'll come," she said. No hesitation. Elias stared a moment, then nodded. They ran through the storm together, mud grabbing at their boots. Lightning split the sky, showing the land in brief, blinding flashes, the horses kicking, the fences bending under wind. Elias shouted orders. Taya followed each one without flinching. By the time they lashed the gate shut, both were slick with rain and trembling from the cold. When they returned, the fire in the cabin glowed low and red. The smell of wet earth followed them in. Asha handed Elias a towel. "Nomi's coughing," she said softly. "Fever's starting." Elias knelt beside the girl. Her skin burned under his palm, her breath shallow. "How long?" "Since morning," Asha said. "We thought it was just the wind." He looked toward the door. The trading post was 3 hours away, 6, maybe, in this weather. "I'll go," he said, already reaching for his coat. Lydia stepped between him and the door. "You won't make it." "I'll make it enough," he said. His tone was quiet, but final. No one stopped him again. Outside, the rain swallowed him whole. He rode through black fields, the road a ribbon of mud, the horse struggling under weight and wind. But he kept going, eyes fixed on the faint glow of the ridge. Back at the ranch, the women took turns wiping Nomi's brow, whispering prayers in a language older than the land itself. Clara knelt beside the cot, holding the girl's hand, too young to understand what waiting costs. Hours later, when Elias pushed through the door with medicine in his pocket and blood on his knuckles from the cold, no one spoke. They didn't need to. In that moment, soaked and shaking, he had given them something no one else ever had: proof that he would come back. Dawn crept over the valley like a bruise fading. The storm had passed, leaving puddles that mirrored the pale sky and fences torn half down. The air smelled of mud, pine, and smoke from a fire that had burned all night. Elias Crowe stood at the doorway, boots heavy, coat still damp, watching the world pull itself back together. Behind him, the cabin was quiet, not the kind of silence that came from emptiness, but the one that followed exhaustion. The fire glowed low in the hearth. Nomi lay on the cot, her skin damp with sweat, hair plastered to her forehead. Asha sat beside her, eyes rimmed red, spooning water against cracked lips. Lydia dozed upright in a chair, a rifle across her knees, as if daring the fever to come back. Elias took off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. His knuckles were split open from the rains, blood dried in the creases. He hadn't slept, not even on the ride back. But seeing Nomi breathe steady, now that was enough to keep him upright. When Clara stirred from her blanket in the corner, she went straight to him. "You came back," she whispered, voice small. He crouched down, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Didn't I say I would?" She nodded, eyes wide, still learning to believe in promises. The cabin came alive slowly. Asha brewed coffee thick enough to wake the dead. Lydia wiped the girl's brow one more time before standing. "She'll live," she said flatly, "because you brought what we needed." Elias didn't answer right away. He looked at his hands instead. "Didn't feel like a choice," he said. "Couldn't leave her to burn up." Lydia studied him for a moment, then gave the smallest of nods. "Most men would have," she said. Later, when the sun climbed higher, he went outside to start clearing the wreckage. The barn roof had lost a sheet of tin, the trough had cracked, and the well pump leaned crooked. It was work that would take days, but he welcomed it. Work kept his hands busy when his heart didn't know what to do. The door opened behind him. Asha stepped out, shawl around her shoulders, a cup of coffee in her hand. "She's sleeping now," she said softly. Elias nodded. "Good. You didn't sleep either." "Didn't feel right," he said. She handed him the cup, her fingers brushing his for a second. "Then drink. You'll work better for it." He took it, murmured thanks, and leaned against the fence. The sun touched her hair, turning the loose strands copper. For a long while, they stood in silence, the kind that didn't need fixing. By afternoon, Nomi was sitting up. Kiona and Sani brought her broth, while Clara sat beside her, whispering something that made the young woman smile faintly. Taya repaired the door hinges, hammer steady, her shoulders rolling with quiet strength. Nahila mended a tear in Elias's coat near the cuff, needle glinting in the light. It wasn't order yet, but it was balance. Everyone moving for someone else. When evening came, Elias sat on the porch, the smell of stew thick in the air. Inside, laughter rose small, uncertain, but laughter all the same. Lydia's voice was there, deeper than the rest, calm like river stone. He closed his eyes, letting the sound wash through him. A month ago, that house had been a tomb. Now, with 7 women and a child inside, it was something else entirely. Not peace, not yet, but the kind of warmth that makes peace possible. And for the first time since he'd buried his wife, Elias realized the ache in his chest wasn't grief anymore. It was hope, quiet, steady, and terrifyingly alive. The next week settled into rhythm, soft, uneven, but real. At sunrise, the women moved like clockwork. Lydia lit the stove before anyone else stirred. Asha boiled water. Sani fed the chickens. Taya checked the fences. Kiona and Nahila washed clothes in the creek. Nomi, still weak from fever, sat with Clara in the yard, teaching her to braid grass into ropes. From the porch, Elias Crowe watched them, coffee steaming in his hand. There was something strange about seeing his land alive again. For years, it had been nothing but chores and silence, 2 graves and a man who refused to leave them. Now it was motion, voices, the smell of bread and wood smoke. He wasn't sure when the change had started, but it was clear now. They were no longer guests. They belonged to the place as much as he did. That afternoon, Lydia approached while he was mending a gate hinge. "You should know our names," she said, standing tall, chin lifted like she was issuing a challenge. Elias wiped the sweat from his brow. "I've heard a few. Not the ones we gave in town," she said. "Those were to survive." The others gathered around, the sound of work pausing all at once. Lydia pointed to each in turn. "Asha means hope. Taya means wind. Sani is song. Kiona means brown hills. Nomi is grace. Nahila moonlight." She hesitated, then looked him in the eye. "And mine. Lydia's not mine. It's Aylin. It means clear water." Elias nodded slowly, repeating each name under his breath, like he was carving them into memory. Aylin, Asha, Taya, Sani, Kiona, Nomi, Nahila. Clara, who had been sitting on the porch steps, whispered, "They're pretty." Aylin gave her a faint smile. "They are old," she said, "older than this land." That night, the cabin felt different again. The names hung in the air like lanterns, small flames giving light to places that had been dark too long. During supper, Clara used each one, carefully, testing the sounds. The women didn't correct her pronunciation, they only smiled. Later, when the moon rose, Elias went to check the barn. The stars were sharp, the night still. Aylin followed him out, arms folded against the chill. "We have lived through many roofs," she said quietly. "Some kind, some cruel. But this one feels waiting." "Waiting for what?" Elias asked. "For us to decide what we are," she said. "You didn't buy us, but you didn't send us away either. That means something." He stared at the horizon, the faint glow of the fire through the window. "I don't know what it means yet," he admitted. Aylin nodded, as if that answer was enough. "Then we'll find out." The wind rustled through the corral, lifting dust and stray hay. For a moment, they stood side by side in silence. Behind them, the faint sound of laughter came from the house, Clara's voice tangled with Sani's song. Elias turned back toward the sound, a small smile finding him. The women had reclaimed their names. The ranch had reclaimed its soul. And though he couldn't name it yet, something inside him had begun to thaw the way spring water runs beneath ice, soft but unstoppable. The nights grew colder as autumn slipped toward winter. Each evening, the women lit the lamps earlier, and the scent of smoke clung to everything: clothes, blankets, hair. It wasn't unpleasant. It was proof they were still there. Elias Crowe spent most of his days repairing what the storm had broken: fences, roof seams, the pump handle. Work had always been his language, and lately, it was how he spoke to them. Asha helped him with the saw. Taya carried the wood. Lydia sharpened his tools without being asked. They didn't talk much. They didn't have to. That evening, the fire burned bright in the hearth. Nomi hummed softly as Clara braided her hair. Kiona patched a sleeve, and Sani sang a melody that rolled through the cabin like wind across tall grass. It was the kind of peace Elias hadn't known in years, quiet but alive, like a prayer that didn't need words. Aylin, Lydia's real name, sat apart, by the window, staring out at the fading light. Her face, always firm, softened for once. When she caught Elias watching, she didn't look away. "You've rebuilt most of this place," she said, "but not yourself." Elias hesitated, the crackle of the fire filling the space between them. "Maybe some things can't be rebuilt." "Everything can," she said, her voice low, "if you stop fighting the ghosts." He didn't answer. Instead, he stood and went to pour water into the basin, but his hands trembled. She saw it. She saw everything. Later, after the others had gone to rest, Aylin still sat by the fire, and Elias found himself beside her. The flames painted her face in gold and shadow. "When my wife died," he said quietly, "I buried her behind the barn. Thought if I worked hard enough, I wouldn't hear her voice anymore. But it never stopped." Aylin didn't move. "I know that sound, the one that follows you even when you don't want it to." He looked at her, eyes tired. "You lost someone too?" "All of us did," she said simply. "Husbands, brothers, children, even our names." For a while, they sat without words after that, only the sound of the fire and the wind outside. Then Asha appeared in the doorway, her shawl wrapped tight, hair loose from the braid. "Come inside," she said softly. "It's late." Aylin rose, but Elias didn't. He stayed by the dying embers, watching their shadows stretch against the wall. When he finally stood, he saw something small by the fire, a string of beads, woven with feathers, left behind on purpose. He picked it up, thumb tracing the knots. The next morning, the mood was different. The women spoke more freely. Sani's song had words now. Clara tried to follow along. Asha stirred the pot and smiled when Elias passed by. Even Aylin's face seemed less guarded. Near noon, while fixing the barn door, Elias heard laughter, clear and sudden. He turned to see Nomi teaching Clara a few Apache words. "This one," she said, "means home." "Home," the girl repeated, and Nomi nodded, pleased. The word sank into Elias like warmth after cold. Home. It had been years since it meant anything. But as he looked toward the cabin, where smoke curled from the chimney and 7 women moved with purpose through his once empty land, he understood something had changed. He hadn't just saved them from the storm. They had pulled him out of one too, the kind that lived inside a man's chest, the one that no amount of work or whiskey could quiet. That night, when the fire burned again, he sat by it and whispered their names under his breath. Asha, Taya, Sani, Kiona, Nomi, Nahila, Aylin. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid of it. He had people under his roof. He had warmth, laughter, and light. And for a man like Elias Crowe, that was a miracle big enough to believe in. By late November, frost began to cling to the edges of the windows each morning. The breath of the horses rose in white clouds, and every bucket of water froze overnight. Elias Crowe had known hard winters before, but never with 7 women and a child sharing his land. The ranch had changed not just in noise or color, but in spirit. Smoke rose from the chimney at dawn. Laughter slipped through the door cracks at dusk. What had once been a cabin of ghosts now pulsed with life. But life came with questions, and some of them couldn't stay buried. It began one afternoon, as the sun dropped behind the ridge. Aylin and Elias were hauling wood to the porch while the others finished patching blankets inside. The air bit at their skin, sharp and dry. When they set down the last bundle, Aylin spoke without turning. "We need to talk about what this is," she said. Elias froze, his hand still gripping the rope. "What do you mean?" "This." She gestured toward the house, toward the smoke and laughter spilling from it. "You brought us here, you feed us, you work beside us, but we need to know if this is a stop or a home." He looked at her then, jaw tight. "I didn't bring you to own you." "I know," she said. "That's why we're still here. But none of us are used to men who do things without wanting something back." The words stung more than he expected. "You think I want payment?" "No," she said softly. "I think you don't know what you want." They stood there, the wind tugging at their coats. The truth hung between them like cold fog. Elias had told himself he saved them for Clara's sake. But every day since, he had caught himself looking toward the cabin for voices, for faces, for proof he wasn't alone anymore. "I just wanted the quiet to end," he said at last. "The house was too still. My girl needed laughter. I needed—" He stopped, unable to name the rest. Aylin's gaze softened. "Then you found it," she said. That evening, the tension carried inside. The women could feel it. The air grew thick with waiting. After supper, while Clara dozed near the fire, Asha turned to him. "You've built for us, worked for us. But we can't keep pretending we're strangers under the same roof." Elias met her eyes. "You want to leave?" "No," Asha said, shaking her head. "We want to choose." He glanced around the room's 7 faces, 7 stories written in scars and silence. "Then tell me," he said. "Do you want to stay?" Aylin rose first. "Yes," she said simply. Then Zani. "Yes." Then Kiona, Nahila, Taya, Asha, and Nomi, their voices following one by one like echoes in the canyon. The sound filled the small room until even the fire seemed to burn brighter. Elias swallowed hard. "Then I'll build another cabin," he said quietly. "One for you. You'll have space, walls of your own. Not because you owe me, but because you belong." Aylin tilted her head. "And what about you?" He hesitated. "I'll be close enough to hear you laugh," he said. "That's enough." Later that night, while the others slept, Elias sat alone at the table sketching the plan for the new house. The candlelight flickered over the paper, his rough lines trembling but sure. He wasn't building charity. He was building permanence. Outside, frost spread like silver veins across the earth, sealing the ranch in quiet. But through the cabin walls came the faint sound of breathing 8 lives woven together by accident, now steady by choice. Elias looked up toward the ceiling, listening to that sound. He'd once thought salvation came with prayer or promise. Now he knew better. Sometimes it came in the simple word, yes. And as he blew out the candle, he realized that word had changed everything: the land, the house, and the man who'd finally learned to stop living alone. The first snow came quietly, without thunder or warning. It drifted down over Crow Ranch like forgiveness, slow, white, and patient. The world softened under it. Fences smoothed, tracks disappeared, and the roof of the cabin gleamed pale in the weak dawn light. Elias Crowe woke early, as he always did. The cold bit his fingers before the fire was lit, but he didn't curse it the way he used to. Outside, the land no longer looked barren. It looked peaceful. The second cabin stood finished now, smoke rising from its chimney. The women had moved into it only 2 days before, and already, light glowed warm behind its windows. When he stepped out with a bucket to fetch water, he saw Aylin and Asha crossing the yard, their shawls pulled tight against the wind. "The pump's frozen," Asha said. Elias nodded. "It always is this time of year." He struck the metal handle with the heel of his glove until it broke free, and together they hauled the first bucket. Their breaths rose like ghosts in the air. From the cabin door, Clara shouted, "Papa, look!" She twirled in the falling flakes, laughing, her hair catching bits of snow. Nomi and Sani joined her, the girls' small laughter mingling with their soft songs. Elias stood still, the sight warming something deep inside him. He'd forgotten how joy looked on this land. By midday, the ranch smelled of bread and pine. Kiona mended torn gloves by the fire, Nahila rubbed wax on the window seams to keep the drafts out. The women moved like parts of one body, each task blending into the next. No orders, no questions, only rhythm. Elias worked outside, cutting more wood, fixing the latch on the barn door. His body ached, but his mind was steady. From time to time, he looked toward the cabins, two small shapes in the snow, both alive, both his responsibility. When the sun began to set, the sky blazed copper and violet. The light caught on the icicles hanging from the porch beams, making them glow. Elias carried an armful of firewood inside, stamping snow from his boots. The warmth hit him like a living thing. Dinner was already waiting. Asha had made stew. Clara had set the table with 8 bowls. There was talking now, not much, but enough. Aylin told a story from her tribe, about women who survived the winter by sharing breath in a cave. They called themselves Sisters of the Wind, she said. Clara's eyes widened. Is that who you are? Aylin smiled faintly. It's who we're becoming. Elias sat back in his chair, letting the voices fill the room. He didn't need to speak. Every word was proof that silence no longer ruled here. After dinner, they hung a wooden plank over the porch of the new cabin. The letters were burned deep into the grain. We stay. No family name, no claim, just a declaration. The wind swept across the valley, scattering snow into the air like a blessing. Inside, the two cabins glowed side by side, their light merging in the dark. Asha tuned her small stringed instrument and played something soft. Nomi's hum joined her, then Sani's voice rose above both, a song of belonging. Elias stepped out onto the porch, the night cold against his face. He looked at the lights through the snow and felt the strange peace of a man who had nothing left to prove. Behind him came the sound of footsteps. Aylin, quiet and sure. She stood beside him, arms folded. It's beautiful, she said. It is, he answered. The snow kept falling, covering the ground they had rebuilt together. The land was still wild, the winter still hard, but Elias knew that whatever came next, they would face it as one. For the first time since he'd buried his wife, he felt the ache inside him ease. Not disappear, just soften enough to breathe through. He wasn't just a rancher anymore. He was the keeper of a home. Winter deepened. Days shortened into pale slivers of light, and the night stretched long, slow, and blue. Snow covered everything: the barn roof, the fence posts, the graves behind the house. It muffled sound, softened edges, made even hardship look calm. Elias Crowe woke each morning before dawn. He'd light the stove, feed the horses, break the ice at the pump. By the time the sun rose, smoke already curled from both chimneys. Inside those cabins, life had become steady. He still wasn't used to it, the rhythm of breathing that wasn't his alone. From his porch, he could see them moving through the morning. Aylin chopping wood, Taya leading the mare out to walk, Asha hanging herbs to dry above the door. Sani's song drifted through the cold air as she worked beside Kiona and Nahila to wash clothes in steaming basins. Nomi sat near the fire with Clara, teaching her how to weave a bracelet from sinew and beads. The laughter between them rose like sunlight through the frost. Elias felt something uncoil inside him every time he heard that sound. He'd thought he'd lost his chance at a full life. Now it was here, spilling over the edges of everything he'd built. At midday, they ate together, 2 tables pushed close, bowls of stew, cups of coffee thick as mud. No one called it family, but everyone felt it. There was no paper, no priest, no vows. Only the daily decision to stay. That evening, as the snow turned silver under the moon, Clara came to him holding a wooden plank. Her hands were red from cold, her eyes bright. "Papa," she said, "can we make another sign?" He looked down, smiling. "What for?" "For the barn," she said, "so everyone knows it's ours." He helped her carve the letters, rough, uneven, but proud. Ours. They hung it together, the two of them, while the women watched from the porch. Sani started humming again, the tune turning into a full song as the others joined her. The sound filled the yard, soft but strong, the kind that could carry through any storm. Later, after supper, Elias sat near the fire with Aylin beside him. Her hands were rough from work, her braid dusted with snow. She leaned back, watching the flames dance. "You ever miss her?" she asked quietly. He knew who she meant. Yes, he said. Every day. But I don't ache like I used to. Aelin nodded slowly. You still love her? He looked into the fire. I do. And I love this too. She said nothing, only placed her hand over his firm, certain, alive. Across the room, Clara slept curled against Nomi's shoulder. Asha and Taya mended gloves near the stove. Kiona and Nahila whispered over a small pot of tea. Sani's voice drifted low and even, singing something in Apache that even the wind seemed to pause for. Elias leaned back and let the sound fill him. He realized that somewhere between storms and silence, they had all crossed into something new, a kind of peace earned, not given. When he stepped outside before bed, the world was still. Snow sparkled beneath the moon, and smoke rose from both chimneys into the same sky. 2 cabins, 1 family. He remembered the day he'd ridden into Dry Bluff with $6 and a heart full of ghosts. Now, standing here, he understood what he'd really bought. Not people, not labor, but chance. A chance to build again, to heal, to live. The land slept beneath him, quiet and white. Behind him came the faint sound of laughter, a child's and 7 women's, woven together like a single thread of warmth. Elias smiled, pulled his coat tight, and whispered to the night, We stay. And somewhere in the hush of snow and wind, the earth seemed to answer, not with words, but with peace. And if this story touched your heart, if you believe that love, kindness, and second chances still belong in the Wild West, then don't leave just yet. Subscribe to Wild West Love Stories and join us around the fire each week for more tales of redemption, courage, and the quiet beauty of chosen family. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your voice keeps these stories alive. Because out here, every story that finds a listener becomes part of the legend. Stay with us. The next one begins soon.